This is Rise. Let's lock in with the goal of changing one life at a time. Yours. Together, let us rise up, inspire, strengthen, and elevate our minds. It's time to Rise on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
My name is Dr. Saran Heron, and welcome to Rise. Today we're going to talk about social anxiety in teens and adults. Today we have with us Dr. Thomas Brown, who earned his Ph.D. in clinical psychology at Yale University and then served on the clinical faculty of the Department of Psychiatry at Yale School of Medicine for 20 years, while operating a clinic in Connecticut for children and adults with ADHD and related problems. In May 2017, he relocated to California, where he opened the Brown Clinic for Attention and Related Disorders in Manhattan Beach. He has taught continuing medical education courses on ADHD for the American Psychiatric Association for 18 years and has given lectures and workshops in hospital, medical schools, universities, and for professional and advocacy groups throughout the United States and in more than 40 other countries. Dr. Brown is a clinical professor, psychiatric neuroscience at the University of California, Riverside School of Medicine, and is an elected fellow of the American Psychological Association, the APA Division of Psychopharmacology and Substance Abuse, and the Society of Clinical Child and Adolescent Psychology. He has published 30 articles in the professional journals and 7 books on ADHD with translation of 12 foreign languages. His most recent book are Smart But Stuck: Emotion in Teens and Adults with ADHD, Outside the Box: Rethinking ADD, ADHD in Children and Adults, a Practical Guide, and so many other books. Dr. Thomas is here to share his journey to being a psychiatrist, talk about social anxiety in teens, adults, discuss treatments, traits, provide useful advice of how to address these issues and get over social anxiety. Dr. Thomas Brown, welcome to Rise here on the Voice of Nassau Community College.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your having me on.
Not a problem. Now, you have been in this field for many years. Talk to us. How did you decide to pick this profession?
Actually, as I had to earn my way through college. My family didn't have much money. And so I worked as a lifeguard and swimming instructor at the local YMCA. And then they asked me to be a counselor for kids at the Y. And one thing led to another, and I found that I enjoyed doing that work, and then gradually ended up doing more of it, and then went on and got my doctorate in psychology. And my specialty has been ADHD, and I've published 7 books about that. But I've also gotten interested recently in social anxiety, which is something I hear a lot about from my patients, and I'll be glad to talk about that when you're ready.
Yes, excellent. Now, we want to talk about, you moved to California. You opened the Brown Clinic for Attention and Related Disorder in Manhattan Beach. Why did you decide that you wanted to open a clinic? I know you did this in May of 2017.
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly why. I've been married for almost 50 years, and my wife got sick and died in 2014. And so I had 2 grown kids and a couple of grandkids out in Los Angeles. Right. And I felt like I didn't want to leave 3,000 miles between me and the rest of my family. And so I gradually packed things up in Connecticut, and then was fortunate enough to be able to move out to Los Angeles, where I got a house and opened this clinic. My colleague who had been working with me in my clinic in Connecticut came with me.
Nice.
And so I now live 10 minutes from my daughter, her husband, and the 2 kids, and 30 minutes from my son and his wife, and very much enjoying life here.
Wonderful. Now, you have on YouTube a 28-minute video which talks about, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which has 9 million views. Briefly tell us about that video for those who may be interested in running over and view it after they've listened to our interview.
Yeah, it actually started out fairly simple. I was asked by an organization called understood.org in New York that provides support for education services for people who need a little extra special help. And they said, hey, we'd like to have you make a video. Just talk about what ADHD is. And so they set it up, and I went over to the studio, and they told me I had to do it in about half an hour, and I finished in 28 minutes. And basically, all I did in there was to talk a little bit about what my understanding is about ADHD, and to describe how the way I think about it is a little different from what's in the official manual. Mm-hmm. That includes some things that aren't in the official manual, but there's 6 parts to it. One is getting organized and getting started on things. Another one is being able to focus and shift focus as you need to in order to deal with whatever it is you've got to do. Another is sustaining alertness and effort, which ties into, among other things, sleep.
Right.
Being able to get to bed at a reasonable time and then being able to get up at a reasonable time, but also being enough to sustain effort at tasks you're trying to do, whether it's schooling or business. And then also tied in with that particular portion of this model is difficulty in getting ideas out of your head and into sentences and paragraphs when you have to do it. So it all has to do with kind of effort and alertness. Yeah. And then another thing, which is very much a part of ADHD in my mind, in my experience with talking with patients, is managing emotion. It's not listed among the characteristics of ADD, but the fact is, for some people, they have difficulty managing their anger and their frustration. Other people, it's not that. They just worry a lot.
Yes.
Other people, they are consumed with desire for whatever it is they want to get or whatever they want to do. And others are just so afraid of something bad happening to them or to the people they care about. And so managing emotions, I think, is a big part of it. And then the other thing that's a piece of the fifth of the 6 clusters has to do with memory. But the part of memory which is important in ADHD is not long-term storage memory, being able to think about happened a long time ago or that movie you saw 10 years ago. It's more about short-term working memory. It's what you depend on, for example, when you go in the other room to get something, and then you're standing there scratching your head around what the hell you came in here for. Or when you go downstairs to get something you need for some project you're working on, and then see something else that needs doing and get into doing that, and forget that you had project number 1 upstairs and now you're starting on project number 2. And so it's that short term, being able to hold more than one thing in mind at a moment. And then finally, action, being able to. So often people think about ADD just as tied. The old idea was it was just hyperactivity. Couldn't sit still, couldn't shut up, little boys who are driving everybody nuts. But the fact is, it has much more to do with this whole range of management of oneself. And sometimes it's a matter of controlling the action, not just the hyperactivity constant, but sometimes people just talk constantly and gobble up all the airspace so that nobody gets a chance to hear them.
Sounds interesting. I'm sure many will run over and watch it. Now we're going to get into the topic of social anxiety. As we've talked about this, and you said it's real. Talk to us. What is social anxiety for those who may be listening and never heard of it?
Yeah, something I hear about a lot from many of my patients. Not everybody, but many. And social anxiety is simply a term for something that all of us have sometimes, where you sort of worry about what other people are going to think about me.
Right.
How do I look? Do they think I look good in this outfit I'm wearing? How do they feel about what I just said? Did it sound stupid to people, or does that make sense to people? Worrying way more than most people do. Social anxiety is worrying way more than most people do about how other people are thinking about them right now.
Now we want to talk about our teenagers, particularly. Mm-hmm. And what are some things that you find that are common causes in terms of social anxiety among teenagers?
Well, actually, the ones who have social anxiety as teenagers very often had social anxiety starting when they were a lot younger. It may blossom and get to be more of a problem, but the fact is, The research which has been done on it shows that there are some differences you can find with people who end up with social anxiety starting when they're infants. There were studies they did at Harvard with infants where they put them in a sort of situation where they weren't in any danger, but it was sort of an unfamiliar situation. And there were some of them that as soon as they got in that situation started wailing about and crying and fussing, even though their mother was right there with them. And there were others who they fussed a little bit, but not that much. And there were many who were just curious.
Right.
And then what they did was track those kids as they got older, when they were 5 and 7 and then 13. And what they found was that many of those kids who as infants, as young as 4 months, were overreacting to something which was just an unusual situation for them, often ended up with social anxiety, worrying way too much about what other people might be thinking about them.
You are listening to Rise on the Voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Saran Heron, and today we're talking to Dr. Thomas Brown, who earned his Ph.D. in clinical psychology at Yale University, then served on the clinical faculty of Department of Psychiatry at Yale School of Medicine for 20 years, while operating a clinic in Connecticut for children and adults with ADHD and related problems. In May of 2017, he relocated to California, where he opened the Brown Clinic for Attention and Related Disorders in Manhattan Beach. He has taught medical educational courses for over 18 years and have given lectures, workshops in hospital, medical schools, universities for professionals and advocacy groups throughout the United States and in more than 40 other countries. Dr. Thomas Brown is here today to share his journey as being a psychiatrist, talk about social anxiety in teens and adults, and discuss treatments, traits, provide useful advice of how to address this issue and get over social anxiety. Now, Dr. Thomas, we've been talking a little bit about social anxiety. Now, tell us the reason why you're so passionate about educating others, which you have done for many, 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 many years. And why do you believe it's so important?
Actually, I believe it's important because so many people suffer with this problem and feel too embarrassed to tell anybody about it, including sometimes people who are in treatment with psychologists or psychiatrists, but they don't want to mention that because when they look at it, they see that they're fretting and worrying over things that there's not much reason to really get so worried about, but they do worry about it. Right. And they have a hard time stopping it.
Now, as you know that the same thing exists in adults. Talk to me about your experience with social anxiety and adults who actually suffer from that.
Okay, well, in terms of there are quite a few people who have these difficulties. The data that we have tell us that if you look at teenagers, say from 13 to about 17, among the girls, about 11% of them are going to qualify for a diagnosis of ADHD, and in that age group, only about 6% of boys do. However, once you look at the older group, from 18 up through 64, you're looking at about 12% of the girls, of the women. That doesn't change much, but with the boys, it's gone up to about 14%. So what this is saying is that a sizable percentage of teenagers and adults worry about this, but the thing which is most striking about it is only about half of those who have this difficulty ever seek any treatment or help with it. And the other part of it is most of those who do seek treatment usually seek the treatment only after they've been suffering 15 years with the problem.
Wow, that's a long time.
It sure is.
Now, we're going to get into treatments for those listening who may realize now that maybe they're suffering from social anxiety. What are some treatments that are available? Let's talk a little bit about the different options. And I suppose how do each work? How is it going to be helpful? Should one decide to try any of these treatments?
One of the things that's helpful about it is to be able to talk with a physician or a psychologist or psychiatrist or a counselor who's able to be compassionate and to recognize that this is a problem that a lot of people suffer with. And it's not people who are hurting in the smarts department.
Right.
You see it among people who are super, super, super smart, high average, middle average, low average, so you can any place on the IQ spectrum. And the fact is that those people who have this suffer with a lot of problems. For example, among those people who have this problem of social anxiety, they tend to drop out of school a lot earlier than many other people do. They often suffer with more unemployment. They often don't go as far as most others of their age in school. Many of them remain single, and those who do get married, many more of them get divorced.
Wow.
So there are a lot of difficulties. And, one of the things is that, of course, the essence of this is they're worrying too much, more than most people have to, about what other people might be thinking about them. And the other person might be the partner they've got in a relationship. It might be the other people that they're going to school with. It might be the teachers that they have in school. It might be, people in the neighborhood. But the problem is they just are struggling so much of the time with, are these people thinking I'm just totally uncool, or that I'm just not very smart, or I don't belong among them?
Now, for those who may be listening to the program, whether teenagers, adults, and as you know, our college students who may be listening, for those, what kind of encouragement could you offer for those who really, need to get help and are deciding, to get help? How would you encourage them today?
Well, what I would do is to encourage them, first off, to, if they have access to a counselor, and to bring up the issue with them, that they realize they're worrying way more than they need to about what other people might be thinking about them. And if they're willing to trust the counselor to hear that, and to talk a little bit about when the worry is most difficult and how long it's been going on, this is hard for people to do because many of them feel embarrassed about having the problem. And then the other thing that is available is for some people, just talking about it and having understanding on the part of the person they're talking with, and some compassion, and to recognize that this is something that people can struggle with, and that doesn't mean they're bad persons or particularly weak people, that they've just got something which often is genetically loaded in part. It can be better or worse depending on what kind of family you're growing up in. But the fact is that it's a difficult thing to deal with. But it's also something that sometimes the counseling alone will do it. And then sometimes they need a little bit of medication to do it. But we don't have to use heavy-duty medications with this usually. Okay. But you do need a clinician or a counselor who has some understanding of what this is about.
Now, you've been an expert, of course, in your field for a very, very long time. And listeners may be wondering, how challenging is it for you at times, especially for those individuals, I'm assuming that they may come to get help and maybe still in denial. How do you address those experiences?
I try to listen to the people I'm talking with and encourage them to tell me about what the things are that they'd like to see change in their life. And gradually, if you listen with some compassion and empathy, many people are quite willing to talk about this, even though they feel embarrassed about it. And I can tell you that a lot of people find it easier to talk about sexual problems than to talk about social anxiety, as surprising as that may be.
Now, on the other hand, how rewarding it is for you to be able to help clients realize that, listen, you do not have to suffer anymore from social anxiety. Like you said, it's real and there is a solution. There's different treatments. There's things that you can use that can help you, slowly. Obviously, everybody's going to respond differently. But how rewarding is it for you when you do see that client gets the treatment and you see the good results?
I love what I do. And the reason I do is that I have a chance to walk these journeys with people and to see the way in which they can develop more confidence in themselves, more understanding about how it is and why it is that these have been persisting problems for them, and that they can gradually begin to reach out a little bit and not be so confined by the social anxiety they've been struggling with often for a lifetime.
Now, earlier you mentioned that sometimes it takes like 15 years for one to get help. Why do you think people tend to wait that long? 'Cause that's a long time to, like you said, it's a real problem. Why, from your experience, from your data, from your research, do you share with us some of the common reasons why?
Well, I can tell you what people say, and that is that if I was having panic attacks, or if I was really depressed, or if I was having a problem of drinking too much or smoking too much weed, things like that, most everybody understands people have sometimes. But many people sort of just shake their head and wonder what's wrong if you're saying you're worried about what other people think about you. That the response of other people often is, well, why would you be caring about what they care about you? Right. Why don't you just sort of go along and let the chips fall where they may? And the fact is that people often feel ashamed of having these problems and ashamed to let other people know they're struggling with them.
You are listening to Rise on the Voice of Nassau Community College 90.3 WHPC. My name is Dr. Saran Heron, and today we're talking about social anxiety in teens and adults. Dr. Thomas Brown is here with us today, who earned his Ph.D. in clinical psychology at Yale University and then served on the clinical faculty of the Department of Psychiatry at Yale School of Medicine for 20 years while operating a clinic in Connecticut for children and adults with ADHD and related problems. In May 2017, he relocated to California, where he opened the Brown's Clinic for Attention and Related Disorders in Manhattan Beach. He has taught continuing medical education courses for over 18 years, given lectures, workshops, taught in medical schools, university, advocacy groups throughout the United States in more than 40 other countries. Dr. Thomas is here to share his journey to being a psychiatrist, talk about social anxiety in teens, adults, discuss treatments, traits, provide useful advice of how to address this issue and get over social anxiety. Now, you have also written books. Tell us a little bit about your most recent books and what can one expect from your books and how will it help them?
Okay, well, the first 7 books I've written have been about ADHD. And I'm fundamentally a clinician. I spend most of my time talking with patients. I see little kids, I see teenagers, I see adults. My youngest patient at the moment is 4 years old. My oldest patient is 79.
Wow.
And there's some people I see for just a few hours for an initial consultation and then make recommendations for them. There are other people I see on a more ongoing basis. But the people are coming in because they're struggling with things that they want and need some help with. And, I find that if I'm patient and try to give them some support for recognizing that there's no such thing as having a stupid problem.
Right.
That many of these things are things that a lot of people suffer with, even though they don't get talked about very much. And let me also say that sometimes it has to do with people feeling ashamed of things that they have done, or even things they've thought of and just thought of and imagined and maybe even wished for, thinking that if my parents or if my friends or my spouse or my children ever knew that I did these things or that I wanted these things or I imagined these things as things I'm sort of interested in, I would just be so ashamed of it. And it's almost like the thinking is equivalent to the doing.
Right. Now, as we're getting ready to wrap up the show, I want you believe that one can reclaim their life. Share with us quickly, what are some tips that you believe one could use to reclaim this life and get over social anxiety?
First off, I would say it's not easy to deal with. Usually by the time anybody comes to me to talk with me about it, it's been a problem we've had for quite a long time.
Right.
And it's not the easiest thing in the world either to find somebody you could be understanding. Now, for some people, it might be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. For some other people, it might be their primary care doctor. For somebody else, it might be a pastor or some sort of other spiritual leader. For others, it might be just a close friend or another relative to try and say, hey, look, this is something I've never mentioned to you, but it worries me a lot, and I'm kind of embarrassed about it. But I hope you can understand that this is something I don't want things to be this way, but they are.
Right. And for those listening who want to reach you, how could they get in touch with you?
Well, I have a website which is readily available. It's just brownadhdclinic.com. Or you could look up on my name as Dr. Thomas E. Brown, clinical psychologist, and you'll find me online.
Wonderful.
And my clinic is in Manhattan Beach, and I've got 7 books I've published on ADHD. The one that's most popular is Smart But Stuck. The subtitle is Emotions in Teens and Adults with ADHD. It's a bunch of case examples, mostly, of people who've had ADHD and have struggled with it, and using that broader description of ADHD, which I mentioned earlier in the program. That's one thing. And then I have a new book that's coming out next month, actually, called Social Anxiety. It's the first book I've written and published on this topic, but the title is Social Anxiety, and then it's Hidden Fears and Shame in Teens and Adults.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Thomas, for being here today. I'm Dr. Saran Heron. I thank you for listening to our program. I hope you found it helpful. Dr. Thomas provided great insight about traits, ways you could get help, and let us have compassion for those individuals. And of course, they can rise and reclaim a beautiful life they were designed to live. Stay blessed, everyone, until next week on our episode. Thank you for listening to this week's edition of Rise, available wherever you listen to podcasts and always right here on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
The Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council present the story of Tom and Levi.
Tom is the smartest man I know. He's been a professor at 2 major universities, been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, he told me that he was having problems in his classes. I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. And he was telling them that he was doing it as a favor to them, but I think in reality, he just wanted to get out of there. I was really starting to worry because I saw something was wrong.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me, and my love for him was just immense.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.